Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and nobody in the public gallery, but welcome to our youth mayor and our prospective new youth mayoralty. Your first cabinet meeting, I think. So welcome, enjoy. I'm sure you will. So apologies, we have Councillor Graves, Councillor Holmes, and Councillor Skelton, I believe. Anybody else? Anything else? No? Late items. We do have one on this occasion. We have a paper on Adoption East Midlands, which I think, Andy, you're going to talk to us about.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Cabinet for accepting this as a late item. The purpose of this report is for Cabinet to note that as a result of Derby City Council joining the regional adoption agency covering the Derby, Derbyshire, Nottingham and Nottinghamshire footprint from the 1st of April, that there will be a workforce transfer to the host authority, which is Nottinghamshire County Council, with effect from the 1st of April under the provision of 2p. In February 2018, Cabinet agreed, in light of a statutory requirement for all individual local authority adoption agencies to be combined into regional adoption agencies, that a regional adoption agency for Derby, Derbyshire, Nottingham and Nottinghamshire Council should be formed. Decisions around the model, business case and host authority were delegated to myself as the Strategic Director and the Cabinet member, and this has progressed over the period since February 2018 towards developing a D2N2 regional adoption agency. At the point of the Cabinet paper in February, it was the intention that staff from the 4 local authorities would likely be seconded to the host authority. However, following a process which has included securing legal advice, it's clear that 2p will now apply. Cabinet is also asked to delegate authority to the Strategic Director and Cabinet member to negotiate and agree the terms of the interagency agreement. This will record the nature of the partnership and principles of joint working agreed by the 4 local authorities. The agreement documents the commitment by Nottinghamshire County Council to provide the adoption service on behalf of the RAA, together with the commitment of the 3 other councils to provide the childcare and permanence work to an agreed specification to support the work of the RAA. So I'd ask Cabinet to agree the recommendations outlined in 2.1 and 2.2.
Thank you. An observation just to say that clearly, obviously, in the medium term, we hope this will have benefits for us, great benefits for us, working together on this subject, because it will hopefully cover some of our needs. Councillor Williams, anything to add? Any observations? Any questions anyway? Corporate Scrutiny did have a chance to look at this last night and resolved to note the report. So, thank you. So, item 4 is identification of urgent items, to which call-in will apply, and there are none. Declarations of interest from anybody, please? Okay. The minutes of the meeting held on the 13th and the 28th of February. Moved. Thank you. The recommendations of the Executive Scrutiny Board. They looked at the full papers last night. A couple of recommendations were forthcoming, but as usual, I propose to deal with those on each individual item, if that's okay. So, recommendation from the Regeneration and Housing Board at item 8. Who's that coming from? Who's doing that one? Do we have somebody? Yes, it would probably be Councillor Holmes. Greg, did you want to offer anything on this? Have you seen the report? You know which one it is? No, it doesn't matter then. Yes, Councillor Kerr. Well, let me just introduce it firstly. Okay. I'll be like, you're on the Regeneration Board.
I'm the Vice Chair of the board.
Thank you. Yes, carry on.
So, and it's actually a very brief. It's a very big introduction to a very small point, which is just the looking at the importance of getting balance on the way we look at planning applications, and looking at the valuable position that Marketing Derby is taking up as as a coordinating comments on the economic side of things, which I think, Chair, you will remember was put to the Renaissance Board as well.
Yes, thank you for that, Lucy. It's in relation to the formation. It came out of John Forkin, Marketing Derby's presentation to the board, I believe, and reference to the setting up of an Economic Development Advisory Committee, a balancing act, if you like, to counteract or to offer a different perspective to the likes of the CAAC and heritage lobbies in relation to planning applications, which I think it's fair to say the review board welcomed. And I know that Councillor Holmes is looking at this along with other aspects of the planning process, in particularly in relation to a protocol to deal with the way we deal with planning applications and a number of other fine-tunings in relation to planning which will be forthcoming in the future. So absolutely we should take the recommendation to acknowledge the contribution being made by the group established through Marketing Derby to improve the information on the economic aspects of planning applications for major developments. Very much to be welcomed and something that's work in progress and will be reported back. Any questions, any observations? Okay, so we can accept item 8. And we'll move on to item 9, which is the new model for neighbourhood working. Richard, yes.
Chair, thank you. That's me. So this report highlights the council plan that sets out our ambition to deliver a new model of neighbourhood working across all of the 17 wards within the city. It also looks at how we're going to carry out that neighbourhood working function in the broader context of public protection and the responsibilities that the council and its partners share. It's intended to improve the public realm, tackle local issues and protect the public, and it's to support this approach is to increase the number of public protection officers within the new operating framework. So there are 3 recommendations in the report. It's to approve a refreshed approach to neighbourhood working, including a problem-solving model set out in 4.7 to 4.18, and I'll return to that in more depth. 2.2, so to approve an increase in the public protection officers from 9 to 20, with every ward having a named officer, and also to approve the reinstatement of the devolved funding for each ward, and that element is set out at 4.17. So in terms of the neighbourhood working model, we have agreed at a previous cabinet to make sure we've got good governance, good partnership meetings across the city, including the Safer and the Stronger Communities Outcome Board. That will be there to set the strategic direction around primarily crime and disorder, following a strategic assessment. We've agreed with Derbyshire Police that we'll have joint citywide tasking. There are existing local tasking arrangements that we will tap into, and utilising the public protection officers around delivering a frontline, universal, uniformed approach, so high visible reassurance. Officers spending 85% of their time patrolling, so they're tackling local issues, generally set by the neighbourhood boards, and having the ability to then draw on more targeted or specialist teams, such as trading standards, neighbourhood officers, safer housing, environmental health, etc. So, as part of that, the public protection officers will continue to deal with environmental crime. They'll continue to deal with antisocial behaviour, but for the first time also deal with parking offences. And when we say parking offences, generally within the context of that role, we mean nuisance parking, so double yellows, obstruction, parking on zigzags outside of schools, match day parking. And those PPOs really will be our capable guardians in a new Derby City uniform, patrolling the streets, so high visible reassurance. They will also have a closer working relationship with the police, and there are some existing positive discussions with the outgoing and incoming Chief Superintendent. That's around potential for a community safety accreditation scheme, looking at joint accommodation, joint working on thematic issues, so things that trouble communities such as serious organised crime, modern day slavery, county lines, rogue landlords, closer intelligence sharing, potential powers around alcohol confiscation, disorder ASB, truancy, graffiti, begging, tobacco, abandoned vehicles. So they start to get all of the necessary powers, if you like, to tackle quality of life issues. That, in essence, will allow and buy the capacity for the neighbourhood partnership officers set out at 4.13. So each ward will continue to receive that targeted offer, working to local priorities, supporting community leadership, working on local projects, campaigns, engaging with the community, developing that social capital, bringing local partnerships together, key partners with the police, Street Pride, etc., but also try and give that role greater capacity to explore additional external funding together with neighbourhood managers to undertake necessary bid writing on behalf of the city. And then with regards to the devolved funding set out at 4.7, that will be £10,000 of devolved funding allocated to each ward from 1920, but 1920 will be pro rata. So we're starting that from October, so it's £5,000 in the first financial year, £10,000 per ward thereafter. The budget is set out at 7.2. The change in that budget is some additional income and contribution from Derby Homes, and also the expected income that we would get from issuing of PCNs, but also FPNs as well from the environmental crime side. And obviously that does intend to try and contribute to the MTFP. In terms of legal implications, things like having the correct uniform, having the correct delegations, particularly around getting the penalty charge notice issuing right, so we keep the payment rates at a healthy level and we're being fair and reasonable how we discharge that responsibility. And also with the existing 9 PPOs, addressing the issue around 2P transfer, because they are in essence contracted in from Nottingham at the minute. And I think on my last point would be it's more jobs for Derby, so going from 9 to 20, there's 11 new posts that we would like to recruit and try and get local people into those uniform roles. I'll pause there and happy to take questions.
Thank you, Richard. Initial observation, obviously I think Cabinet will wholeheartedly welcome this proposal. For us, it's something that we've had in mind for a long while. It will mean an end of neighbourhood working in Derby by postcode. It will be more smarter, more targeted, more responsive service for all the citizens of Derby. And actually, you didn't touch on it much, but we will have a capacity to deal with city centre issues along the way. The devolved funding, I know it certainly in my ward and wards across the city will be very much welcomed. It's a way of investing in the people in our communities who take the time to get involved and absolutely gets their buy-in and investment in their time in getting involved. Just a couple of points I was going to raise with you, Richard. We have talked about the need for clear guidelines in relation to how that devolved funding might be spent, and also in relation to complete clarity on what neighbourhoods working will and won't mean in each individual ward. And I anticipate that they'll be subject to further reports or clarification in the short term. Yeah.
Chair, yeah, absolutely. So in relation to the latter point, as part of the project plan where we look at everything from uniform to vehicles to accommodation, what is in scope there is to provide some clear guidance to councillors around how to access some of those services and some of the changes as well around neighbourhood working.
That's right, Richard, because we talked about it being more targeted, more responsive. It can't be electioneering, it can't be inappropriate actions. It needs to be much more focused on the needs of the community. and to get things right. So I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Chair, thank you. And then your first point around the devolved funding, there is a draft devolved budget approval process at Appendix 2, which provides some clarity how the money can be accessed and what it can be spent on. It's basically local ward-related issues signed off by the neighbourhood board, but with some oversight from the neighbourhood managers. Cabinet member reserves right to review that on a monthly basis.
Okay, well, that clarity is very much welcome. Cabinet members, any questions, any observations?
Thank you, Chair. Just want to say a big thank you to Richard and the team for putting in some extensive work into this Cabinet paper. I think it's something that everyone knows, that this Cabinet's ambition into delivering for the city. It is always an evolving feat, neighbourhoods, and I think the public, and from the public reaction so far, it's very much welcomed. And I think this will go a long way into helping make our communities prosperous. And I'm looking forward to working with them in the future. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to endorse
Thank you, Chair. I just want to quickly mention that Voice in Action have spoken on this topic before, and seeing an increase in public protection officers and this new devolved funding is very much thanked and looked fondly upon.
Thank you very much, and I hope you'll see, along with the rest of the communities, the benefits that come out of it. Alan, do you want to speak?
Well, thank you, Chair. I just want to endorse the words of the Youth Mayor and Councillor Smale, because I think this, as Chairman of the Chellaston Neighbourhood Board, we welcome the fact that 17 wards are now going to benefit from funding, and also the public protection officers. To have a named public protection officer in your ward is a major step forward. So thank you, Richard, for all the work that's gone into this. I welcome this on behalf of Chellaston Ward.
Thank you, Councillor Eldred.
Thank you, Chair. Despite reports that have been put on social media, the Labour Group are not opposed to public protection officers. In fact, we're quite delighted by the U-turn of the Conservative group who now support public protection officers when you, Chair, as leader of the Conservatives last year at the budget, proposed an amendment to the budget to get rid of them after Labour introduced them. In fact, your proposal was to scrap all of them, so we're delighted that you've now come round to our way of thinking in terms of public protection officers. We do, though, have some legitimate concerns about the proposals as they stand, and I think robust scrutiny and challenge should not be mistaken for opposition. It is our job to provide scrutiny and challenge, and to make sure that the council's doing the right thing for the people of Derby. I think the first thing is that there is a concern that this will be a cash cow for the council and is an income generating strategy. There is clearly in the proposals the need for these officers to generate income immediately, and the concern is twofold with that. There's that they will have targets by the time they're up and running. Each officer will be expected to issue at least 6 tickets a day or penalty notices a day in order to meet their targets, which could put those officers under a certain amount of pressure. They will have to generate income to pay their own wages, which we don't believe is the right approach. And there is a risk that if they don't generate enough income to pay their own wages, that money will have to come from somewhere else in the budget and therefore could risk other services. So I think those are legitimate concerns. I think whichever way you cut it as well, the other part of this proposal, you talk about extending neighbourhood resource to all 17 wards. Actually, in reality what that means is there are wards at the moment who have an intense neighbourhood officer support that will no longer have that. So there will be a reduction of neighbourhood officer support in some wards, and that's something that we will watch very closely, because as I said in the full budget council meeting, the allocation of that support was on the basis of need and on the basis of deprivation. And those are the areas in the city which still have the greatest need and the greatest inequality. I think also there is a concern that these officers are well, essentially they're to compensate for police cuts. Not that I'm suggesting that, the council's been responsible for police cuts, but the reality is that Derbyshire Constabulary, if I can say that word, since 2010 has lost 378 police officers and 18 PCSOs due to government cuts. And the worry is that this is a way of councils picking up that work that the police force are no longer able to do. And what's being happened is we're being expected to pick up that mantle and do the work of the police, which they no longer can do because of the massive cuts that they've had to their budgets in recent times. So I think these are legitimate concerns, Chair, and we will be watching the progress of these officers and providing challenge and scrutiny where necessary.
Councillor Kerr?
Thank you. And, sorry, I've turned that on. Thank you. I was going to ask a bit more about 7.2 and the figures within there, because maybe, like Councillor Eldred, I was looking at the third line here in terms of the income. Now, earlier on in the paper, I think 4.9 talks about an interventionist model with engagement education, and the third point is enforcement. And I really support that engagement and education element, and for things like getting the recycling in the correct bins or explaining to people that they really shouldn't be dumping on the streets, what we really need is that education element. And I do acknowledge that sometimes you need not just education, but you need to have something with a bit of teeth. But if our education is working, then I don't know why we are getting an significant increase in our income. Now, between the first year, between 1920 and 2021, I can see that, because we won't have everything up and running in a fortnight's time. And therefore, there will be a part-year effect. But if we are effective in our engagement and education, why are we seeing such a significant increase between 2021 and 21-22?
I'd beg to suggest that the answer would be that there will be more enforcement, but perhaps, Richard, you got some comment on that?
Chair, thank you. I think that the first point around the interventionist model is a good one. So it's really important that we allow officers to use their discretion. And I think when you're looking at a whole range of different, offences, there are some offences that are just appropriate to ask someone to stop. There are others that you need to move to a warning, and then there are others that you move to that kind of primary enforcement, a fine. There are certain offences that have been committed that there is not much room for engagement and education. So if you've parked across the zigzag yellow lines outside of school, you've done that knowingly, and if you receive a fine, there's not much room for negotiation. You hope people learn having received the fine. History will tell us that's not always the case, so people using mobile phones is a good example. The amount of vehicles at speed is a good example, where we continue to try and do the education, but people do offend, unfortunately. The second point around income, the numbers we've put in there, we think are reasonably conservative. So when you look at the amount of tickets that would be required per officer per day, they're quite conservative. We're not expecting officers to have targets. The budget is for managers to manage, and whilst we are contributing to the MTFP, we're doing so on a sensible basis. And of course, each budget is live, so we will review this as it goes. If it starts to get difficult, we flag that early on. But we think the combination of parking offences being committed across the city, the level of fly tipping we've got to tackle, the level of littering, the level of dog fouling, there is work to do in Derby, and I think it will probably take us more than a couple of years to get properly on top of that.
Okay, so Scrutiny looked at this last night, came with two recommendations. One was a factual error at 6.2, a recognition that PPOs had done work in other wards across the city. That can be amended, I'm sure, Cabinet, yes? And the second one was to request that there's a performance review after 12 months, which I'm sure was the intention, and we can agree that as well. So unless there's any other questions, are we able to agree the recommendations? They are, is this right? They are 2.1 to 2.3. Can they be agreed? Thank you. Item 10's yours, Richard, as well, I believe.
Chair, thank you. So this report sets out the Infrastructure Programme Board Capital Programme for 1920. It relates to Highways and Transport budget, 23.7 million, the vehicles and plant and equipment at 4.7, and the flood defence at 250,000. It also sets out our proposed programmes for 2021, 22 in respect of the asset management elements of the Highways and Transport programme. And of course this follows the rolling 3-year self-assessment that enables us to be compliant with the relatively new Highways Asset Management Framework that was previously presented to Cabinet, I think in October. There was also a specific recommendation to approve 106 spend as part of the Highways and Transport programme. So the Highways and Transport programme seeks to achieve the goals of the Derby's long-term transport plan, and that's set out in the LTP3. In the vehicle plant and equipment programme, funding is prioritised against the replacement criteria, which is based on expected life of the different vehicles that we possess and the equipment, and also the operational demands on such equipment and services. In the 1920, it focuses on ensuring that our vehicle fleets are Euro 6 compliant as Derby looks to achieve the air quality compliance. The flood defence programme funding is targeted towards schemes which manage and reduce the potential for the impacts of flooding to properties and infrastructure in the city. So the recommendations set out at 2.1 to 2.5 are to approve the proposed Highways and Transport programme for 1920 plus the asset management schemes for 2021, 21, 22, and that's detailed in Appendix 2A. It's page 6 for ease. The second one is to approve the allocation of the Section 106 contributions for 1920 Highways and Transport. That's shown in Appendix 2B, and that's set out at page 15. With regards to the Section 106 contributions, I think it was Rachel Reid that sent out the quarterly report in January, and she received no objections with regards to that one. 2.3 is to approve the proposed vehicle and plant equipment programme for 1920. That's set out Appendix 3, page 18, and to approve the proposed flood defence work programme at 1920. That can be seen at Appendix 4. That's page 19. The rest is relatively self-explanatory. I'm happy to take questions on the schemes where I can. They're prioritised as well, so I think it's just worth pointing out the priorities are set out for wards at, struggling to find that now, bear with me. So each ward has chose 2 priorities and they'll reflect. So they're set out at Appendix 2C, which is page 16. They were set by the neighbourhood boards, except for those wards without the boards, so Allestree, Chellaston, Littleover, Mickleover and Oakwood.
Okay, thank you, Richard. I think there is an amended sheet, front sheet in circulation, just so that we can make sure everybody's got the up-to-date one. Christine, did you want to run through any slight changes on there?
Just the couple of changes you will see in 1.1, the Highways and Transport programme should read 23.735 million. The original version read 27, and then just over the page, recommendation 2.5 has not printed properly, so there's just that front sheet that is replacing what you've got. So hopefully that is everyone's got that in front of them.
I think Cabinet's papers are included in that. Have you got those, Lisa? Yeah? You got them, Lucy? Yeah. Okay. Good. Well, a lot of work goes into this, obviously, every year. It's work in progress. There's a lot of work that we plan to do in terms of asset management over the rest of this year as well, but to be welcomed, and thank you for all the efforts that go into it. So is there any other comments? Councillor Smale, do you want to add to that at all?
Yeah, just to add thanks again to the team for the work they've done, in particular the highways, of putting their priorities forward towards me to bring to this Cabinet. I think there is quite a lot of projects on there that we know that have been identified and need to be done, and I know that highways are already looking with suppliers and contractors to deliver those schemes. So there'll be more details that will go out to the neighbourhood boards of the respective wards on these schemes in the near future. But I think it's very much welcomed, but also in particular in regards to the plant, vehicles, plant and equipment, because in point 1.3, obviously there is going to be a focus now on our vehicle fleets to be Euro 6 compliant, and that's something that I want to be monitoring personally myself. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Executive Scrutiny Board looked at this last night and resolved to request that the full business case seeking approval for the local air quality plan is circulated to members of the board for information. That is due to be submitted by the 26th of March. It says the 23rd there, but so 26th of March. And there's no objection to that being circulated once that's submitted. Okay, so we can agree that recommendation to Councillor Kerr. From my point of view, I think we were quite, we focused on being able to maintain 2 local priorities for each ward. That's why they're in there. We intend to try and deliver them. If there are any issues like that, I'm sure, then ward councillors will be able to work with officers to try and amend it and look at alternative ways of doing it. I'm sure there'll be that flexibility around. So, yeah, in terms of the figures, perhaps I could ask you to speak with the officer offline about those details and see where exactly we're coming from. Make sure there's no material faults in the numbers. Sometimes it's just literally additions and takeaways. Right. So Richard will clarify what your numbers issues are. So, okay. Any other comments on this paper then, Cabinet? So then we have recommendations 2.1 to 2.5. Can we agree those? Thank you. Item 11 is the Derby Growth Zone update and strategic approach. Greg.
Chair, sorry. Chair, this report relates to our very ambitious bid for Housing Infrastructure Fund to support the housing development on the strategically significant South Derby Growth Zone. It does provide a quick update on progress and makes a number of recommendations which are necessary to be in place before the next stage of the bid, which is submitting a business case to the government on the 22nd of March. Just to recap, the housing elements of South Derby Growth Zone comprise 2 large sites in South Derby, Infinity Garden Village, which is largely south of Ragley Way, but also the Bolton Moor site. Both sites, we're working with very positive landowners, positive developers. We're working with South Derbyshire, of course, and the county, because the Infinity Garden Village straddles both Derby and South Derbyshire. There are viability issues on both sites. No surprise, there's high upfront costs in relation to the new junction off the A50, but also a new primary school on the Bolton Moor sites. Hence, housing infrastructure funding is essential. The housing infrastructure bid itself, I would just say, is slightly larger than us. There's one bid for the LEP area. It's coordinated by Nottinghamshire County Council and does include other sites, which loosely relate to HS2 around Chesterfield, Towton and Chetwynd Barracks. The benefits are picked out in 4.6. I think the recommendations are fairly self-explanatory, but the first two relate to the permission to submit and accept funding should we be successful. The next four relate to different aspects of the contractual arrangements. 2.7 relates to a development framework document, which is really a document which helps guide the planners in the respective planning departments when they're evaluating the planning submissions that come in. The planning applications, of course, are determined on their merits. And the last two relates to the us gearing up to use compulsory purchase powers if necessary. We think that's very unlikely that would be necessary, but we are encouraged by Homes England to put some preparations in place. The report doesn't give a lot on key dates, so I'll just add a little bit more. The business case submissions 22nd of March. I'm told the decision on our funding application is after the 14th of June. I don't know when after, they won't give a before date, but we'll cross our fingers for that one. Planning applications for Infinity Garden Village will go in very, very shortly, in a matter of a couple of weeks. Application on Bolton Moor is already in, but the planning application for the school will come in the autumn. Works themselves depend to some extent on whether CPOs are necessary, but for Infinity Garden Village will be starting in October 20, if not before, and for Bolton Moor in about a year's time. Chair, this is a small step but a significant step in achieving these really ambitious proposals, and I'm happy to recommend that to you and take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Can I welcome this report, Chair, and thank Greg and his team and also our planners for the work that they've done in trying to make this possible. The link road to the A50 and the island and moving it out of the green areas has been a real bonus for residents in wanting to keep the area of greenland that could have been affected on the originally proposed route. We've been innovative with this one. We've tried all sorts of things to include other areas of the city. Unfortunately, we are now down to confirming some areas for development. We will keep working on the other sites around Infinity Park and the villages surrounding. But this is a good news story. It's something we should all welcome. It will meet our housing needs in the area when it does come to fruition, and I really do thank the officers that have been involved with this for all the hard work that they have put in.
Okay, thank you for that. But just before you come in, Lucy, just one for me is just in light of the recommendations, Greg, 2.4, for example, to delegate the authority to the strategic director in relation to negotiating the agreement. I appreciate all this will come back to a future cabinet report, but in the light of other project management things that have gone on recently, would it be advisable to include the cabinet member in that at 2.4 and
yes,
other
Chair,
sections in relation to that?
I think that's very sensible, and I think it's probably something that should have been in the report, so thank you for picking that out.
And actually, in relation to the school, do we need the same in relation to negotiations on the school side of things?
I think that should be a standard for all the recommendations, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kerr. Sorry.
If I may, I would just, you did make the point, but we will be bringing back, as the development agreements, delivery agreements are developed further for final approval, because there'll be many twists and turns. If I may also... If I may also add, it's not envisaged at this point that Derby City Council, this authority, will deliver the infrastructure works. They'll either be through the County Council in its role because of the nature of where the road's going, or in the developer in terms of the infrastructure on site. Just a point of clarification there. But you are correct, we will be coming back.
Okay, it's also suggested that we include the corporate director for resources in the recommendations too, which I think is sensible.
Absolutely, Chair.
Councillor Kerr.
Thank you. This area, and I think the development here, we've been anticipating it for a good many years, and it's obviously a few years behind the developments that have already been happening on the fringes of other areas of the city, such as the building that's going on Highfield Farm and beyond Mickleover. In those areas, we are seeing the growth in traffic, that however much you design an area to be itself good for cycling, good for buses, good for people to walk, trying to encourage the employment there at the same time. Inevitably, if there's employment, not everybody lives adjacent to it. If there's people moving in, they don't all get a job on the adjacent site. So we will inevitably, with this, see a growth in traffic. And that will impact on our arterial routes into the city, on Stenson Road, onto Osmondson Road and round the Ring Road, and it will have impacts, and more widely. Obviously, putting in the junction onto the A50 will mitigate some of that, but it'll also mean that people will be driving out of town to reach that junction on the A50, so that rather than you know, if you lived in the Normanton area, instead of accessing it through the A514 or down out along Burton Road, you might then be using Stenson Road to reach the A50 junction or Sinfin Lane. So this will change traffic flows, but it won't necessarily reduce traffic flows, however well we design it. So I think there needs to be some more awareness here as to how we can influence the people who are currently travelling by car, and getting people in those areas to look at how they are travelling, and make sure that we've got good enough bus routes and cycle routes in those areas, so that we've got capacity for the oncoming traffic to not jam up our city more than it is. I don't know what the mechanism can be for that. I don't know if there's opportunities for funding. We're obviously getting funding in other ways through the Transforming Cities, for example. But this level of housing going in is going to have an impact. And if we're not thinking about how we can address it now, and the mechanisms by which we can address it, we will have problems. It's both the main report and the appendix is remarkably silent on this. There are those promises and expectations of the good, sustainable modes within the new development, but not within the existing infrastructure or existing communities, which are sadly lacking in some areas. The recently opened path that we've funded through from Section 106 from Heatherton to provide a link between Heatherton and towards Sinfin will clearly be important for maybe people moving into Infinity Park, Infinity Village, who are going to be working at the Royal Derby Hospital, and I'm sure there will be some there. But it isn't a continuous route. If you're going to cycle along that route, there are big gaps in it. People won't choose to use it because it isn't all there. We need to have a mechanism to joining up a good routes across the whole of our city. And that is where the local cycling and walking infrastructure plan is going to be vital. And I guess that will be coming to Cabinet in the coming weeks or months. But if we don't get things like that right, we are going to be having problems. So I'm just flagging that up as a concern at this point, because it may become a problem in 3 to 5 years' time.
Okay, it's a good point, well made. The traffic flows and highways issues are well recognised already. They may not be included in the report, But you're right, the A50 junction is the key to opening up the South Derby growth zone. But we have opportunities, like you say, in relation to the Transforming Cities funding, in relation to HS2 strategic transport strategies. We have the National Infrastructure Commission coming to work with us in Derby to look at exactly these sort of things, and we can tie that in with our city-wide clean air strategy that we're going to be bringing in. So you're right to bring it up, but it is in the pipeline, and they will be subject to, these things will be subject to further discussions and further papers. And another example is the development of a development corporation to deal with HS2, the airport, and other strategic transport matters around Derby. So it is well on the agenda. But thank you for that. Any other comments, Cabinet? In that case, we have recommendations the corporate scrutiny looked at this and resolved to note the report. So we can take recommendations 2.1 to 2.9 subject to the addition of other consultations. Yes? Agreed? Thank you. Item 12 is another positive story, hopefully, a purchase of residential conversion to provide 8 new affordable homes. Greg, you going to deal with this one?
Yeah, I mean, Chair, very briefly, as you say, it is a positive story. We've had a number of these over the years, and we're trying to up our game in this. In this case, we're buying a number of 8 units from a converted building, using a combination of right-to-buy receipts and the HRA account, i.e. we're borrowing against predicted rent income. Homes will boost our affordable housing stock, help us achieve our target, managed by Derby Homes. It's wholly positive for the city. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so executive scrutiny resolved to note the report. Are there any comments? Councillor Webb?
Just to say, Chair, that if we hadn't done this, there's no planning obligation on the developers to provide affordable housing. So this will be the part of the affordable housing element in this development. So it really does add to our contribution towards affordable housing. It uses the right to buy, and it means we don't have to give money back to the government as long as we spend enough of those right to buy receipts.
Which is always good. We don't want to give money back. So we can agree recommendations 2.1 to 2.4. Thank you. Item 13 is the establishment of the Derby and Derbyshire Safeguarding Children's Partnership, which was considered by scrutiny, and they resolved to note the report. Andy.
Thank you, Chair. So this report seeks Cabinet approval to establish new multi-agency safeguarding arrangements across Derby City and Derbyshire County, which would replace the current Derby Safeguarding Children Board. Working Together 2018 replaces the requirement to have local safeguarding children boards, or LSCBs, and for safeguarding partners comprising of the local authority, clinical commissioning groups and police to agree local arrangements. Under the revised guidance, it is permissible for the new arrangements to cover more than one local authority area. The new arrangement would be called the Derby and Derbyshire Safeguarding Children Partnership and would bring together the lead members and chief officers from the statutory agencies to oversee and scrutinise the work of a joint executive board. This new arrangement will build on the excellent performance of both boards, noting that the LSCB in the City was judged as outstanding by Ofsted in our 2017 inspection of children's services. To support the new arrangements, the report seeks approval to establish a joint business support team hosted by one of the local authorities. The report outlines that both the City and County are happy to host and that a process was going to take place to determine who this will be. Since the statutory timescales are tight, we are required to submit to a DfE by June of this year proposals for new arrangements in order to be operational by September. Therefore, it was proposed that the hosting arrangements and specific details regarding the business unit be delegated to the relevant Directors of Children's Services in consultation with the Cabinet members. In terms of a further update, I'm pleased to report that following a process whereby the Clinical Commissioning Group and police critically appraised the applications to host from the city and the county, the decision was for the city to host the new safeguarding arrangements. I'd ask Cabinet to approve the recommendations listed at 2.1 to 2.3, noting that in terms of recommendation 2.2, a decision has now been made by the statutory partners for Derby City to host the new arrangements.
Thank you. And again, the Scrutiny Board last night looked at this and resolved to note the report. Anything to add on this? Any questions? Councillor Williams.
Thank you very much. I would just like to say that both the Derbyshire contingency and the Derby City contingency, when presenting their cases to the clinical commissioning bodies and the police, both did outstanding in their contributions, and it was a very tough decision for them to make. So I'd like to say well done to both the teams, bizarrely. Congratulations, Derbyshire. But actually, I'm quite pleased that the decision was made for Derby City to host that. And I hope, and I will work towards making sure that we continue to keep that outstanding provision here in the city. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So we have recommendations 2.1 to 2.3. Can we agree those? Chair? Yeah, thank you. Item 14 then is Health Watch Derby funding arrangements, which again, Executive Scrutiny resolved to note this report. So this is going to be Andy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Under the Health and Social Care Act, there is a statutory duty for local authorities to commission a Health Watch organisation for their locality who fulfil a consumer champion role for customers of health and social care services. The Council worked with our local partners to establish Health Watch Derby back in 2012-13. This process was overseen by the Derby Health and Wellbeing Board, and the organisation is a statutory member of our Health and Wellbeing Board. Funding for the organisation is arranged through a grant agreement between the Council and Health Watch Derby, and the current agreement expires on the 31st of March. This report proposes to award a new grant for the period of 3 years from April 2019. The level of funding varies annually in line with central government funding allocation, and the amount of funding is still yet to be confirmed. However, I would ask Cabinet to agree the recommendations outlined in 2.1 and 2.2.
Thank you. Any comments, questions? In that case, can we agree those recommendations 2.1 and 2.2? Thank you. Item 15 is the Beckettwell Lane and Beckettwell regeneration report. Again, Scrutiny looked at this and resolved to note the report. So, Greg.
Chair, thank you. We are now moving into the delivery phase of this, which is by far the largest city centre regeneration project that we have. And that's in line with our strategy for this site of acquiring key sites, de-risking those, and seeking their development through the private sector. The report seeks a number of necessary approvals in order to progress this. The overall approach is that we are developing an agreed master plan which envisage Beckettwell being turned into a place with a new look, a new feel, a new density, a new destination for Derby, a place you want to choose to go as a place that you maybe choose currently to avoid. There will be an exhibition and consultation on the proposals commencing on the 28th of March, and there'll be plans and images of those proposals then for discussion. This will lead to a planning application, a hybrid application, detail for phase 1, outline for the rest of the site, which will be submitted subsequently. Of course, the approach leads to the demolition of most of the existing buildings, starting with Debenhams. Phase 1 will be on the Debenhams site, and that will comprise residential accommodation. In parallel with the building of that, we'll create a new square adjoining that site off Victoria Street. And successive phases will be mixed use, and really the use will depend on the market demand, but it will comprise commercial, leisure, education, hopefully. The mechanism for delivering is through a series of land sales. These will be at market value. And in order to facilitate, in order to do that, we need to extend the exclusivity agreement to St James Security. St James themselves will be doing the build-out, and the overall development value of this site is around 170, 180 million. It is an absolutely major development in Derby. The public funding that is going in here into the site is almost primarily through local growth fund, but also through some recycling of receipts. And by what I mean by that, when Duckworth Square, for example, gets development, that we will receive a receipt for that. That will be recycled back into the Beckett Well area. We've already previously agreed that principle, but the report does just refresh approval on that. Of course, the confidential papers give more details of the finances. Timing, again, I think the report's light on timing, so I just thought I'd add a little bit more, if I may, verbally. The planning application for St James is due to go in this early summer, in June. The demolition of Debenhams to start mid-summer, be complete by Christmas. The first phase of apartments to start in April 2020, in about a year's time. The works of the square will be in parallel to that. And the Pennine Hotel, which the report refers to, is looking to demolish that in the first quarter of 2020. Chair, this is a significant development, and I think it's important. We are now moving to delivery phase. Happy to take any questions on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. It's obviously a massively important part of the city centre master plan to tackle an area that's been like it is for many, many years, as many years as I can remember. We've certainly got some very positive vibes from St James's Securities. It's one of those to watch this space as soon as the plan application comes up, and we'll get some more detail out of that. Cabinet, any questions, any observations? In that case, as I say, corporate scrutiny looked at it and noted the report. Watch this space, and there are some pink papers later on in relation to the numbers. So we can agree at this point recommendations 2.1 through to 2.7, if that's okay. Okay. Item 16 is compliance with contract and financial procedure rules. Don.
Thank you, Chair. There's 8 decisions required of Cabinet this month to comply with our contract and financial procedure rules, and these are set out in paragraph 1. I'll just take you through them one by one. The first one is seeking approval to use £35,000 from our reserves to keep a scheme going for the next 3 years. This is a physical activity and social isolation service. Will be running the Good Gym scheme. This is a community running scheme and for Keep Fit. The second one is to approve a late addition of £100,000 into the 1920 Housing Revenue Account capital programme. This will top up an existing scheme for emergency calls and make the scheme up to £250,000. The next one, seeking approval to make a bid, an expression of interest for a recent government initiative, Future High Street Fund. The government are putting in a significant chunk of money, £675 million to bid against, and we're seeking approval to put an expression of interest in by the 22nd of March. The fourth one is seeking to spend an extra just over £4 million to allow more pupil places at the Chellaston Academy School. The County Council will actually be contributing just over half of that, and it'll improve the number of admission numbers for the school from 265 to 300. The next 3 are asking for approval for some late one-off funding, government funding that we've received for adult social care, for adults and children's social care, and a £210,000 contribution towards the impact that an exit from the European Union might have on the city. And the 3 amounts of funding we're asking to allocate to the appropriate reserves and draw down when needed. And the final one, Chair, is to correct an anomaly. We made an error in the budget report that went through the Cabinet and Council process in February. And this is asking to put back a small Chellaston Park play area scheme within the capital programme. It was already in 1819. It slipped into 1920, but we missed it. So we're looking to put that back into the programme, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Corporate Scrutiny looked at these and resolved to note the report. Any questions? Any observations? Yes, Councillor Webb.
Can I just ask for corrections on 2.7, the last line, it should be Cabinet members because it's adults and children's, and that would then read across to 421 where it's the relevant Cabinet members.
And the press and public be excluded from the meeting for the duration of the discussion of the following items on the grounds that they will involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act, and that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. So, that said, are we agreed, Cabinet, that needs to be done? Okay. Thank you very much.